By the end of that afternoon, no one on the set questioned who held the measure of the room. There was no argument, no raised voice, and no visible contest. Jackie Chan would later describe it as a moment that reset his understanding of speed, control, and seniority. What happened was brief, almost unremarkable to watch. But those who witnessed it said the atmosphere changed, and it never returned to what it was before. The set moved the way experienced crews do, without urgency, without confusion. Equipment was adjusted, marks were checked, lighting refined by small increments. People spoke softly, not out of fear but habit. This was a place where precision mattered more than volume. Bruce Lee arrived without ceremony. There was no announcement, no shift in schedule. Yet several people noticed him at once, even before they consciously registered why. He did not occupy space aggressively. He stood slightly apart, observing the mechanics of the scene as if studying a system already familiar to him. He wore no costume that suggested authority, no uniform, no emblem. What marked him was economy, of movement, of attention. He did not pace. He did not fidget. When he adjusted his stance, it seemed incidental, though nothing about it was wasted. This was not unusual for those who had worked with him before. Bruce Lee's authority on set was not contractual. It came from an accumulated understanding that he saw things others missed. Camera angles, timing, the distance between intention and execution. He rarely corrected people publicly. When he did speak, it was usually to ask a question that redirected a decision without contesting it. Jackie Chan was already there, younger, energetic, moving constantly between conversations. He had been working hard, harder, some felt, than was necessary. His reputation was growing, built on physical daring and relentless practice. He was respected, especially by the stunt team, who saw in him a willingness to endure discomfort without complaint. The two men existed in different rhythms. Jackie's energy was outward, kinetic. Bruce's was contained, almost sealed. They did not clash. They did not compete. At least, not openly. Those watching sensed a quiet hierarchy, though no one had defined it. Bruce did not supervise Jackie. Jackie did not defer explicitly to Bruce. Yet when Bruce stepped closer to the action, others unconsciously adjusted their positions, creating space without being asked. It was not reverence. It was recognition. Bruce watched a rehearsal run. He said nothing when it ended. Instead, he asked for the sequence to be repeated once more. Not louder, not faster, just once more. As it played out again, his gaze remained steady, not critical, not impressed, simply attentive. When it finished, he nodded slightly and stepped back. The moment passed, but the impression lingered. Jackie noticed this, even if he did not fully understand it yet. He had grown accustomed to measuring himself against visible standards, speed, agility, risk. Bruce offered none of these benchmarks. He did not demonstrate. He did not advise. He simply existed within the environment as if it were already mapped in his mind. That contrast, subtle as it was, laid the groundwork for what followed. Not conflict, but exposure. By the time the next break was called, the set felt unchanged on the surface. But an unspoken awareness had settled in, one that would soon require acknowledgement. It happened without intention. There was no announcement, no challenge issued across the space. The words emerged during a pause, between takes, between adjustments, when conversation drifted the way it often does among people who have been working together too long to maintain formality. Jackie Chan was speaking to a small group near the edge of the set. His tone was light, almost amused. He had just finished a sequence that required repeated bursts of movement, each take slightly faster than the last. Sweat had begun to darken the fabric at his collar, and he seemed pleased with the effort. Someone commented on how quickly he had completed the final run. Jackie smiled and responded without thinking too much about who might be listening. "I think I'm faster now." The statement was not framed as a comparison. No name was spoken, no target identified, but everyone understood the reference. It was not arrogance, at least not in the way arrogance usually presents itself. Jackie had spent years pushing his body past its limits. Speed, to him, was measurable, countable frames, shorter reaction windows, tighter margins. In that moment, it felt like a reasonable observation. What he did not account for was context. Bruce Lee was not part of the conversation. He stood several meters away, engaged in discussion with a crew member about camera placement. His posture did not change when the words were spoken. He did not look up immediately. There was no visible reaction. Yet the air shifted. Those close enough to hear fell quiet. Not because the comment was offensive, but because it introduced something unresolved into the room. A comparison had been implied, and comparisons, once voiced, do not remain neutral. Jackie sensed it too. Not instantly, but gradually, as conversations around him thinned and eyes drifted elsewhere. His smile faded, replaced by a brief, searching look, as if replaying what he had just said. He did not regret the words, but he became aware of their weight. Bruce finished his discussion and turned slightly, his attention now oriented toward the broader set rather than any individual. His expression remained unchanged. If he had heard the remark, he gave no sign of acknowledgement. That absence of response was not dismissive. It was deliberate. No correction followed. No reminder of rank. No subtle warning disguised as humor. The claim was allowed to exist on its own. And in allowing it, Bruce shifted responsibility back onto the space itself, to the people listening, to the silence that followed, and eventually to the need for resolution that silence creates. Jackie waited for something to happen. Nothing did. But waiting in that moment was enough. Because once a statement like that is released into a room governed by unspoken standards, it does not vanish. It settles. It lingers. And sooner or later, it asks to be addressed. Not with words, but with clarity. The work continued, but attention fractured. Crew members remained professional, returning to their stations, adjusting lights, and checking marks. From the outside, the set looked no different than it had an hour earlier. Yet beneath the routine, a quiet awareness circulated, subtle but persistent. People began watching without meaning to. Not watching for drama, watching for response. Bruce Lee moved through the space as he had before, unhurried, precise. He spoke briefly with the director, listened more than he talked, and positioned himself where he could see the full width of the scene. Nothing about his behavior suggested confrontation. That, in itself, unsettled expectations. Had he challenged the comment, the tension would have dissipated into noise. Words could have been answered with words. Authority asserted could have been accepted or resisted. But silence offered no such release. Jackie felt it most acutely. He continued rehearsing, repeating movements that now carried a different weight. Each run was sharper, each stop cleaner. Yet the effort felt less certain than before. Speed, when unmeasured, begins to feel abstract. Between takes, he glanced toward Bruce. Not directly, not obviously. He was not seeking approval. He was seeking orientation. Bruce did not look back. At one point, a crew member approached Bruce with a technical question unrelated to the tension. Bruce answered calmly, adjusting the suggestion by a few degrees, a few frames. The solution was efficient, almost understated. The crew member nodded, satisfied, and left. Someone nearby observed quietly. He sees everything. It was not meant as commentary on the earlier remark, but it landed that way. The unspoken question circulated. Would Bruce address it? And if so, how? No one expected spectacle. That was not his way. Those who had seen him train understood that demonstration, when it came, was rarely dramatic. It was brief, decisive, often anticlimactic to those hoping for display. Time passed. The longer Bruce said nothing, the more the responsibility shifted away from him. The claim no longer belonged to Jackie alone. It now existed as a shared uncertainty, an unresolved comparison held collectively by the room. This was not hostility. It was anticipation without excitement. Bruce eventually stepped closer to the practice area, not with purpose that could be interpreted as intent, but as if drawn by necessity. He watched a sequence being prepared, his eyes tracing movement patterns before they occurred. Jackie noticed the proximity. He slowed his movements slightly, not consciously but instinctively. His breathing steadied. The outward energy that had fueled his earlier confidence began to fold inward. Nothing had been decided yet. Nothing had been announced. But the space had begun to narrow. And when that happens, when attention condenses and silence remains intact, resolution tends to arrive without ceremony. It did not begin with an invitation. Bruce stepped forward as though responding to a practical need rather than a statement that lingered in the air. He did not address Jackie directly. He did not refer to speed or age or rank. Instead, he asked for a simple setup, something already familiar to everyone present. The request was modest. No special conditions. No audience gathered by design. Jackie was included not as a challenger, but as a participant. Those watching sensed that whatever was about to occur would be brief. Bruce had no interest in extending moments beyond their usefulness. He positioned himself with care, aligning his stance not for display, but for clarity. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, yet nothing about it lacked intent. He spoke quietly, offering minimal instruction, just enough to establish parameters. No explanation of why. Jackie complied without hesitation. There was no resistance, no bravado. He was alert now, focused in a way that felt different from performance. The atmosphere shifted again, not toward conflict but toward concentration. What followed took less time than expected. Bruce moved once. There was no visible exertion, no buildup of force. The action was clean, precise, and immediately complete. It ended before the eye could separate cause from effect. To an untrained observer, it might have looked inconsequential. But those who understood movement recognized what had been shown. Not speed alone, but timing. Not power, but control. The space between intention and execution had been reduced to something nearly imperceptible. Jackie froze, not from shock, but from realization. Bruce did not repeat the motion. He did not clarify what had just occurred. He stepped back as if the matter had resolved itself. The room remained silent, not out of politeness, but because no one felt the need to speak. The demonstration had answered the question without addressing it directly. Bruce returned to his previous position and resumed observing the set, his attention once again distributed across the environment. There was no visible satisfaction, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had taken place. For him, it had not. For Jackie, the moment lingered. He stood still for a few seconds longer than necessary, replaying what he had felt rather than what he had seen. Speed had not been contested. It had been reframed. Nothing had been taken from him publicly. Nothing had been proven aloud. Yet the comparison had dissolved. The set slowly resumed its rhythm. Conversations returned, though quieter. Work continued, though with a subtle recalibration. No one mentioned what had happened, but everyone carried it with them. The change did not announce itself. There was no visible reaction from Jackie in the moment. No embarrassment, no forced humility. He nodded once, almost to himself, and returned to where he had been standing. To anyone watching casually, it might have looked like nothing had occurred at all. But something fundamental had shifted. Jackie's movements afterward were still fast, still skilled. Yet the quality had altered. The excess was gone. Where there had been urgency, there was now deliberation. Where there had been confidence seeking confirmation, there was attention seeking understanding. He did not approach Bruce. He did not apologize or clarify. There was nothing to correct. The realization had arrived privately, and that was where it stayed. What Bruce had shown was not superiority in the narrow sense. He had not outperformed Jackie in a visible contest. He had revealed a gap, one that could not be closed by effort alone. The space between technical ability and mastery had become unmistakably clear. Others noticed the effect as well. The crew did not discuss the moment, but they adjusted to it. Instructions directed at Jackie became fewer, more specific. He listened more closely than before, not out of obligation, but because he now understood that efficiency came from precision, not intensity. Bruce, for his part, remained unchanged. He did not monitor Jackie. He did not offer guidance unless asked. He did not reinforce the lesson. That restraint was part of the demonstration. By refusing to follow the moment with commentary, Bruce allowed its impact to mature without interference. He trusted that what had been felt would outlast what could be explained. Later, during a brief pause, Jackie observed Bruce again, not as a benchmark to surpass, but as a reference point to study. He noticed how Bruce conserved energy, how he waited without waiting, how he engaged only when engagement was necessary. This was not intimidation. It was orientation. The earlier claim, spoken casually, almost carelessly, no longer held relevance. Speed had revealed itself as one variable among many, and not the decisive one. What mattered was when movement occurred, not how quickly it traveled. The collapse, if it could be called that, was internal. Nothing in Jackie's career was diminished by the moment. Nothing was taken from him, but something had been rearranged. Ambition narrowed into discipline. Confidence softened into awareness. And respect, no longer abstract, found its proper place, not as deference, but as alignment. The incident did not become a story immediately. In the days that followed, it was not discussed on set. There was no retelling over meals, no exaggerated gestures to recreate what had occurred. It remained what it had been in the moment, contained, precise, and unembellished. Bruce Lee continued working as he always had. Jackie Chan continued training as he always would. But time has a way of isolating meaning. Years later, when Jackie spoke about Bruce, the memory surfaced, not as an anecdote of being corrected, but as a reference point. He did not describe the mechanics in detail. He never emphasized what Bruce did. Instead, he spoke about what he felt in that instant. The sudden awareness that mastery does not announce itself, and that speed without timing is only motion. By then, Jackie had become a master in his own right. He had refined his craft through injury, repetition, and reinvention. His understanding of movement had deepened, shaped by experience rather than assertion. And when he reflected on Bruce, it was not with comparison, but with clarity. Bruce Lee did not live long enough to see the full reach of his influence. But moments like that afternoon carried forward quietly, embedded in the way others trained, taught, and measured themselves. The story spread, not because it was dramatic, but because it was instructive. Those who heard it understood what was missing from the retelling. There was no challenge issued, no victory claimed, no humiliation delivered, only a question allowed to resolve itself. In martial arts circles, the story became less about Bruce and Jackie and more about a principle. That true authority does not rush to assert itself, and true learning begins when comparison collapses. Bruce never spoke publicly about the moment. He had no need to. His teaching was never confined to words. It lived in restraint, in timing, in a refusal to do more than was necessary. That afternoon was not a lesson designed for an audience. It was simply a correction applied at the precise moment it was required, and nowhere else. Decades later, the set is gone. The people have scattered. The films remain. But among those who care about mastery rather than display, the memory endures. Not as a tale of who was faster, but as an example of how respect is shaped, not by force, but by inevitability. Nothing loud marked the end of that day. Work concluded. Equipment was packed. People went home. Yet something lasting had been placed into motion. And like all quiet demonstrations of mastery, it did not seek remembrance. It earned it.